potential. And I remember from a young age having some kind of problem reading numbers. And one thing that stays with me is that I know a lot of children do this. They write ulta.
Yeah.
Threes and fives become ulta. And I just, even till a much later stage, I was not able to write five. Until someone explained to me visually that you just draw a man with a big stomach and a long nose. And I said, oh, that's five. And I've never, ever made that mistake ever again.
Yeah.
And I said, why didn't someone just explain it to me in a way that made sense, as opposed, because maths is another language. It's really like learning another language. So I think that that person who was like a relative, I think, at that point, just made such a significant difference. And I think it was a small thing that just helped me to understand that perhaps the problem doesn't lie within me. Perhaps somebody could explain this to me in a way that makes it less complex. And it gave me the confidence, therefore, firstly to appear in maths class. Otherwise, I used to disappear to the bathroom and try and tackle more problems. The next one was quadratic equations, which I still can't do, and nobody can explain quadratic equations to me. I can solve it, but I cannot form it.
I think we're here with you. I think I've forgotten the word quadratic equations too till you brought it up today. But it's something we're going to talk about today, the idea of positive learning environments and finding allies in adults around you to support you in your learning journey. I think, Abhishek, this is the best time to bring you in to share a little bit more about learning gaps, like Soha's talking about, things that were sort of not really seen and diagnosed when we were younger, and even now is not so prevalent. So can I have you share some details, please?
Sure. So Soha already talked about one aspect of learning gap. According to the Annual Status of Education Report 2024, more than 50% children who are in grade 5 cannot read level 2 grade text. And that is actually what is learning gap. The difference between what is expected as the learning ability at a certain level and what the actual learning ability is. Now, the issue is that this learning gap manifests in different ways. You see various kids trying to hide away from class, hide away from teachers when they're asking them questions, them trying to run away from a few subjects, in many cases drop away from school altogether. And this manifestations can be really dangerous. This year, so every year we choose to spotlight one of the manifestations, and this year we are choosing to focus on a critical one, which we believe is the most detrimental one, right? So if you can look at the Shiksha campaign first, and we'll continue to talk about it.
Yes, can we please play the film? You can watch on the screen here. Dr. Rekha, you can watch right here.
पकड़ कच्चा नींबू पकड़ कच्चा नींबू ये तो कच्चा नींबू निकला क्या यार विकास तू कच्चा नींबू ही रहेगा
बात करती है मेरी खामोशियाँ
कैसा है विकास
क्यों अकेला मैं हुई हैरानियाँ खोया मैं कहाँ गुमसुम सा यहाँ सोना जहाँ
गुड मॉर्निंग सर
गुड मॉर्निंग।
नमस्ते मास्टर
नमस्कार। नमस्कार जाओ, आता हूँ।
विकास बहुत मेहनती है, बस पढ़ने में थोड़ा कमजोर है।
जी विकास कमजोर नहीं है, बस उसके लर्निंग में गैप है। यानी वो कुछ सब्जेक्ट में बाकी क्लास से 1-2 साल पीछे है, पर आप फिक्र मत कीजिए, आपसे वो पीएनजी शिक्षा लाभ में पढ़ेगा और अपने लेवल पे सीखेगा।
मिल गया है रास्ता चल पड़े हो बेफिक्र अब ये सफर आसान हुआ मुश्किलें है अब कहाँ तुझसे है आने वाली सुबह तुझसे ही रोशन है सूरज ये कल का तुझसे हवाओं का रुख है बदलता
बहुत अच्छे ये आंसर सही है
तू चल हम है यहाँ ना ना ना
touching film. And this shows, like we were talking, one of the manifestations of the learning gap, which is labels. When kids face learning gaps, they get labeled. So Kacha Nimbu, Buddhu, Weak, there are so many labels that they get. It is interesting when we were working on this campaign and we talked to parents, guardians, children, volunteers, we realized that these labels exist in almost all languages, which shows that this is an ubiquitous problem. Now, the problem with these labels is that it doesn't stop here. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more they hear it, the more they believe it. And this is where PNG Shiksha steps in. We create mass awareness about this because attention and awareness is the first step to fixing this issue. And then we work on remediating this on ground, right? So that's how we approach. And the story of Vikas is actually not just his story. It is the story of lakhs of children, right? When you see this film, it makes you think about it, but the music really makes you feel it.
I agree. I think we were all rooting for Vikas and children like him, to sort of break through those labels. And I think, for me, this is being a part of this campaign is to see how impactful the core messaging is. When I look back at the films that you guys have done over the past few years and I've moderated, the first was this very sweet, heartfelt story about Bindya, which identified and explained the idea of learning gap. Last year's film used humor and wit to talk about classroom mockery and the resulting viral memes, which encouraged everyone to stand up for the learning gap. And this film talks about labeling, like you said, and the power of our words and how they stick with us through our lifetimes. I think all of us, at some point or the other, have faced certain labels and certain judgments, and we faced a learning gap in one form or the other in our lives. Kalki, I would love to get your reaction to the film. What stood out for you? What resonated? What were you thinking when you were watching this?
I think for me, the minute that he gets seen, the little boy gets seen by this adult, was the most moving part. Because all we need is one person to see us, and it changes the game for us. And I really, I think that when one person sees you, other people also start seeing you. And as you see, the mother comes and she also, it's like a domino effect. And as you see in the film, it's more often than having the potential or not having the skill, it's the lack of self-belief that leads to this learning gap. So I think that's the most important thing, that we have one person to believe in us, and then we start believing in ourselves.
I agree. I think being seen is such an important part of this film, and I think you got the message completely right. Dr. Varka, it's something we were just talking about, actually, and you're a child psychologist with so much experience. So what is your take on this film and labeling?
So many things stood out. First is when he's wondering whether he's going to catch the ball or drop it. It just indicated that unfortunately, Vikas suffers from tremendous anxiety and lack of confidence. And the self-doubt then becomes all pervasive and went even into the classroom with his math problem. So many a times when we have learning gaps due to emotional challenges, it kind of becomes a generalization for the person to start identifying himself as Kacha Limbu in all spheres of life. So what we want to do as therapists is, first of all, train parents and caregivers, teachers, people in positions of power to not define anyone, to not define a person as good or bad, weak or strong, Kacha Nimbu or Pakka Nimbu, to basically break the barriers of labels, because people give meanings to words, and it's the meaning that you and I ascribe to these labels which usually become self-fulfilling prophecies. So I like that very much. But as I watched the film, another thing stood out, that the learning gap that obviously Vikas had was a lack of confidence coming from an emotional problem. There are sometimes learning gaps which are basically, in our language, also called learning disabilities. Those are neurosensory processing disorders, and those learning gaps have to be diagnosed. I do believe today that a lot of children struggle because there is not enough diagnosis of what are the conditions that maybe is no fault of the child and definitely no fault of the parent. It is a genetic neurological wiring with which the child is unfortunately born. So dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, language processing disorders, okay, non-verbal processing disorders are all disorders which are neurological. And for that, you'll require a different intervention. Of course, in the film, it's very clear that everything that Vikas went through was because of the emotional condition that he suffered, which was diffidence. He was not confident that whether he would be able to solve a math problem or whether he would be able to catch the ball. The other thing that came across is the compassionate way in which the sir, the professor or the teacher noticed his struggle. I think it's very important as caregivers and parents, and I think all three of us on the panel, all four of us, are you a parent? All five of us here are parents, to be very mindful, very observant about what our children go through. I'm a mother of a 25-year-old, so she's already gone, okay. But I did notice that during adolescence, when the typical temper tantrums would happen, I would tell my husband, look, just let's be a little more gentle. I think she's struggling with something in school, with her friends. It's not that today she doesn't have her own set of problems. And the minute I kind of explained it from that point of view, the entire shift happened. Because then we were far more comforting. I saw compassion in the film. I saw a lot of compassion. So I think compassionate kind of reassurance, compassionate, hand-holding, support. Because see, children, we have no idea what they are subjected to. Now this poor Bikash is not going to go home and tell his mother that I dropped the catch and everyone called me Kacha Limbu and laughed at me. He's not going to go home and say that, I failed at a math sum or didn't do it correctly, and therefore everyone, kind of made fun of me. He's going to keep quiet. He's going to keep it to himself. And because he keeps it to himself, it may manifest in another way. And it is for us as parents, hopefully, who are more adult, more mature, to read between the lines, to not get agitated, to realize that they're children, they're going through their own upheavals. And particularly in schools, social acceptance is a very big thing. And if I'm going to be bullied, even this name calling is bullying, okay? Being excluded, not being invited to participate is bullying. If it's not going to be done, I'm going to be missing a very important cue of my child when he sits and he's aloof, he's isolated. He may throw a tantrum, he may shout at me, he may just refuse to eat. It is my responsibility as a parent to read between the lines. And I liked it, what I saw, that the professor read between the lines, reassured the mother. So I think the whole movie, the whole film is very touching. I hope, I was telling Abhishek that why are you only restricting Shiksha to the underprivileged? I think everyone needs it. And I think it's very important that we use these methods to even educate people in urban areas, because we struggle as parents. It's not, a parent is a parent across wherever he is. Okay, so maybe it's a good experience.
Where in one particular school, at class 8, they had class 3 furniture. In some cases, blackboards were missing. So while the school were there, the basic infrastructure to enable the conducive environment was missing. In some cases, it was about kids not getting the early childhood education. So many of us have are privileged to have kids who have access to nursery and pre-primary. There are children who directly go to grade 1 in the underserved communities. Some of them don't have basic motor skills. Some of them don't know how to hold a pencil. Right? So that is where we start working with them, and that we make sure that the early childhood support is provided so that the learning gap is prevented. And of course, post that.
I think that's quite a startling number when you think about it. And we, like Dr. Varka said, we are the urban privileged with access to resources, and this is something that includes us as well.
If I can add something here, so many of us face this. I can share my personal example here. So my younger daughter concluded that she's bad at math. And we were trying to get her to learn math. And every time we would have a conversation, she would just run away. And every time there was math homework, that was the only time she wanted to play. Talk about it and figure out a way to bridge this. So we started doing some games and activities with her, which involved math. And she was actually doing a great job at it. And slowly she started she started developing interest in math. And very recently, she came back home very happy saying, hey, I got an A+ in math. And she was in disbelief that how could she make it to this level.
I think what you're going to say is talking about creating that in.
And I think as a parent, you suddenly realize you have to be so many things you are not. Like, you know, you have to be a physicist. My daughter's like, what is a cloud made of? I'm like, oh dear, I have to go back to school.
Yeah.
You know, so you really.
Or Google.
Yeah, exactly. Or ChatGPT, you know. But it's crazy how much you learn when you are with the presence of your child. And in my daughter's case, I mean, she has a few things that I'm already noticing. One is that, you know, it's the typical D and B mix, right? And so I was speaking to her teacher about it, and now they've started basically when they're writing, they focused on her writing, and they said the left hand is your tiger hand. It's like a tiger's tail. It wraps around the paper, you know? So now she knows the tiger hand, and we're like, the D is on this side of the tiger hand, and the B is on that side of the tiger hand. But it's exactly what you were saying, Soha, to have some metaphor. And similarly with math, she started enjoying it because we live in Goa, and in the car, we tell her to count the abandoned houses, because Goa has a lot of abandoned houses. And then we say, okay, if you see a new house, you count that. And then you take away the new, like the abandoned houses. So she's counting on her fingers. So I think this creative element coming in, just taking an interest in that from another perspective really helps. My husband is a piano teacher. And he is teaching her piano, and he realized with two hands, you know, it's very hard to get her to, you know, do a different rhythm with the left hand and a different rhythm with the right hand. So he started using the birds and the bears, you know, so the bear has to creep up to the birds. If the bear goes too loudly, the birds will fly away, you know. So it's this kind of like language which also really helps her focus on something which can otherwise be very mundane, repetition, doing the same thing over and over. And I think that, you know, Shiksha is doing that with MindSpark by bringing in games, by using AI to kind of cater specifically to what that child needs, you know, and really making the child enjoy themselves in the process.
I think it's the enjoyment that's key, right, in learning. And, you know, going back to what you were saying, I was in my daughter's 4th grade class that day, and I published a book 2 years ago, and I'm struggling with my 2nd book. And when I saw how they were explaining to the children on how to write, and I was like, we never learned it this way. It was educational for me, sitting there, and I'm like, that's a good idea, working on that, and where is my exposition, and where is my inciting incident? So I think, you know, Dr. Varka, I want to ask you also, how do parents and guardians, like Kaki said, we're also learning. How do we address these gaps? How do we foster these environments at home, you know, to echo what's being done at school?
So I do believe that a lot of times emotions play a huge part in learning, okay? Anxiety and shame. These are two common emotions which unfortunately children experience when they're learning. So there is a term called collateral learning. Besides learning a subject, I'm also learning an attitude towards the subject. So say, what I want as teachers, parents, especially parents, is let's look for the talent that already exists in our children. Sure. So my first book was 7 Mantras for Teenage Success, which I wrote. And there's an entire chapter there.
You know, there's so much wisdom, because I think if I remember from a PNG Shiksha event a long time ago, you know, we looked up what education means. And education actually comes from the word educare, which is to bring out what already exists. So that is the whole purpose, is to identify and bring out what already exists within us. When it comes to the film, I thought it was beautiful because these are things, my child is now 7.
Yeah.
So, you know, she's of a similar age perhaps as Vikas, and dealing with all these things, finding out what she enjoys and what she doesn't enjoy doing. And there is a bit of a she's at school for 8 hours. I'm not exactly sure what she's doing. The teachers also don't really tell us on a day-to-day basis. They're like, let us do what we're doing, you do what you're doing. And, you know, every so often we'll meet and we'll have a report card and I'll be like, what?
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me this before?
Yeah.
So, for example, in all of kindergarten, KG1 and KG2, Inaya at home with us is the most vocal person you've ever met.
Yeah.
So confident, so outspoken, chatting all the time. And we used to prep our show and shares, our presentations that she had to do in school, I would do with her because I love homework.
Yeah.
You know, my biggest disappointment is these IB schools don't give much homework. I was like, where's the homework? So we prepped and she was like fabulous. And I was like, oh, you know, just tell me what the teachers say when you're done, okay?
Yeah.
And just look at their faces. They're going to be like, wow. And she came home from the presentation. I said, how did it go? And she was like, yeah, it was fine. It was great. It was good. They said it's amazing. And I was like, okay. 3 months later, I was like, so how was the presentation? And she said, it was fine, but she didn't say anything. Like, she didn't say anything. And I was like, what do you mean she didn't say anything? Like, literally, she didn't speak through show and share. And I was like, oh, okay. We'd done this whole prep. And I said, so then what did she do? So because she had a piece of paper, they said we stepped in because we realized that she was feeling uncomfortable and a little awkward. And we asked her questions, and she would literally just go, and only once, you know, and that was it. And I said, Inaya, what happened? You know, how come? And she said, I'm not, you know, I spoke, but very softly. So of course we spoke about this. This is not an uncommon thing where at home you're very comfortable, in school you're not so comfortable speaking in public. It's not something I've usually struggled with, so I didn't, again, I felt it's a reflection on me.